The Winchester rifle cracked across the valley, and Roy Taylor dropped like a stone. His blood pooled in the snow as Gloria Flores worked the lever action with practiced precision, already tracking her next target through the scope. 20 yards away, Ralph Mitchell dove behind a boulder, his confident swagger replaced by desperate scrambling. She had warned them. 3 days ago, standing on her porch in a faded dress and worn boots, she had told them plainly what would happen if they took her horse. They had laughed, called her a crazy old widow, said no woman alone could stop 5 armed men. They were learning different now. Gloria shifted position, her movements economical and silent. 40 years of training did not fade just because a woman chose to raise horses instead of hunt men. The snow crunched softly under her boots as she flanked left, keeping the high ground. Her breath misted in the cold mountain air, but her hands remained steady. Timothy Nguyen broke cover, sprinting toward the tree line. Gloria led him by 3 feet and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Timothy stumbled, clutched his shoulder, and kept running. She had meant to wound him. Dead men could not spread the word about what happened when you stole from Gloria Flores. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The remaining 3 outlaws huddled behind their makeshift barricade of fallen logs, whispering urgently. She could hear fragments carried on the wind. Impossible. Just one woman. How did she know? Gloria smiled grimly. They still did not understand what they faced. She settled into a prone position behind a granite outcrop, rifle steady on its bipod. The scope revealed Tyler Kelly peering around the log barrier, his face pale with shock. This was not how their easy job was supposed to go. Ride in, take the valuable stallion, maybe rough up the widow if she complained. Simple theft from a defenseless woman. But Gloria Flores had not been defenseless for 30 years. Not since the day she pinned a federal marshal badge to her vest and rode into the Montana territory with orders to clean out the worst criminal gangs in the West. Not since she earned the name Ghost Walker for her ability to track men across impossible terrain and put them down with surgical precision. The outlaws had stolen Black Thunder, her prize stallion, thinking they could sell him in Denver for enough money to last the winter. They had not bothered to research the woman they were robbing. If they had, they might have learned that Gloria Flores once tracked the notorious Jameson gang across 300 miles of wilderness and brought them in single-handed. They might have discovered that she held the record for longest confirmed kill-a-shot in territorial law enforcement history. They might have found out that she retired from federal service not because she lost her edge, but because she grew tired of killing. That retirement ended the moment they cut her fence and led Black Thunder away. 3 days earlier, Gloria had woken before dawn as always, her internal clock precise as a Swiss watch. The cabin felt cold, and she could hear wind rattling the shutters. Snow was coming. She could smell it in the air. She dressed quickly in practical clothes, wool pants and a flannel shirt, boots worn soft from years of use. The coffee pot went on the stove first, then she stepped onto the porch to check the weather. The sky hung low and gray over the valley, pregnant with storm clouds. Her breath steamed as she surveyed her small domain. 40 acres of good grazing land, a sturdy barn, and the finest horses in 3 counties. It was a peaceful life, one she had built deliberately after hanging up her badge. She walked to the barn, boots crunching on frost-covered grass. The familiar sounds of horses nickering and shifting in their stalls greeted her. But something was wrong. The rhythm was off. She counted quickly. 7 horses instead of 8. Black Thunder was gone. Gloria stood perfectly still, letting her senses expand the way she had been trained. The broken gate latch caught her eye first, splintered wood showing fresh damage. Boot prints in the soft earth led from the paddock toward the main trail. 5 sets, she counted automatically. 5 men on horseback leading her stallion. She knelt beside the clearest print, studying the impression. The left boot heel was worn unevenly, suggesting the rider favored that leg. Probably an old injury. The horse that made the deepest hoof prints carried the heaviest man, maybe 200 pounds. Details filed themselves away in her memory like evidence in a court case. Gloria returned to the cabin and poured her coffee, thinking. She had not touched her federal equipment in 8 years, not since the day she buried her husband and decided she was done with violence. The trunk under her bed contained a different life, one she had gladly left behind. But they had taken Black Thunder. The stallion was not just valuable, though his bloodline would fetch serious money in the right market. He was the last gift from her husband, bought with their savings just months before the fever took him. Black Thunder represented everything she had built in this valley, the peaceful life she had carved from wilderness and grief. She finished her coffee and went to the bedroom. The trunk opened with a soft click, revealing items she had not seen in years. Her badge, tarnished but still bearing the Federal Eagle, her backup revolver, a custom Colt 45 with ivory grips, boxes of ammunition she had loaded herself, and at the bottom, wrapped in oiled leather, her rifle. The Winchester had been her partner for 15 years of law enforcement. She had carried it through blizzards and desert heat, across mountains and through river valleys. It had never failed her, and she had never missed when it mattered. Her hands remembered its weight, the smooth action of the lever, the precise balance that made long shots possible. Gloria cleaned and checked each weapon with methodical care. Muscle memory guided her movements as she inspected firing pins, tested triggers, and loaded magazines. The familiar ritual calmed her mind and focused her purpose. She was no longer a widow tending horses. She was a federal marshal with a job to do. The trail was easy to follow at first. 5 horses, leaving obvious sign in the soft earth, heading north toward the mountain passes. Gloria saddled her bay mare and set out at a steady pace, reading the story the tracks told. The thieves were not worried about pursuit. They rode casually, stopping to water their horses at the creek, pausing to rest in the shade of cottonwood trees. They had no idea who they had robbed. The trail led up into the foothills, following old mining roads that switchbacked through pine forests. Gloria pushed her mare hard, knowing she could make better time than men leading a stolen horse. The outlaws would be confident, taking their time, probably planning to hole up somewhere for the night before continuing to Denver. She caught up with them at Willow Creek, where the trail forded shallow water between moss-covered rocks. Gloria dismounted and studied the scene carefully. The hoof prints showed the horses had drunk deeply here, suggesting the thieves felt safe enough for a long rest. Cigarette butts lay scattered near a fire ring, and she counted 5 different boot prints in the muddy bank. But there was something else. A 6th set of tracks, smaller and lighter, leading away from the main group toward a cluster of boulders. Someone had left the others, either scouting ahead or standing watch. Gloria filed that information away as she remounted and continued following the main trail. The tracks turned west at Devil's Fork, heading toward the old mining camp at Silver Creek. Gloria knew the area well from her marshal days. Silver Creek had been abandoned for 10 years, but the building still stood. It would make a perfect hideout for men who thought they were safe from pursuit. She reached the outskirts of the ghost town as the sun touched the western peaks. Smoke rose from the chimney of what had been the assay office, and she could hear voices carried on the evening breeze. They were celebrating already, probably drinking stolen whiskey and planning how to spend their money. Gloria picketed her mare in a grove of aspens a quarter-mile from town and continued on foot. The Winchester felt natural in her hands as she moved through the shadows, every sense alert. This was work she knew, work she had done 100 times before. The only difference was that this time it was personal. She reached a vantage point on the hillside overlooking the main street and settled in to observe. Through her scope, she could see 4 men around a fire in front of the old saloon. Black Thunder stood tied to a hitching post nearby, magnificent even in the fading light. The stallion's coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and his head was high and alert. He knew she was coming. But where was the 5th man? Gloria swept the scope across the buildings, searching for the missing outlaw. Movement caught her eye near the old church, a shadow that did not belong. There he was, rifle in hand, watching the approaches to town. They were not as careless as she had thought. She studied each man through the scope, memorizing faces and positions. The leader was obvious, a big man with a silver beard who gestured as he talked. Tyler Kelly, if she remembered the wanted posters correctly. The others were younger, probably hired guns looking for easy money. None of them looked particularly skilled, but 5 against 1 was still dangerous odds, unless she changed the odds. Gloria worked her way around the town perimeter, moving like smoke through the pine trees. The sentry was her first priority. He stood in the church doorway, scanning the trail but not the forest. City men never looked up, never thought about high ground or flanking movements. She approached from his blind side, using the building itself as cover. The Winchester stock made a solid thunk against the base of his skull, and Gary Martinez dropped without a sound. Gloria caught his rifle before it could clatter on the wooden floor and dragged his unconscious body inside the church. 4 left. Gloria returned to her observation point and settled in for a long watch. Patience was the hunter's greatest weapon, something she had learned tracking Apache raiders through the desert. Rush the shot and miss the target. Wait too long and lose the opportunity. Timing was everything. The outlaws grew louder as the night deepened and the whiskey flowed. She could hear fragments of conversation carried on the wind. Easy money. Stupid woman. Should have taken more than just the horse. Their arrogance would be their downfall, just as it always was. Near midnight, Tyler Kelly stood and stretched, then walked toward the old hotel. 2 of his men followed, leaving only Ralph Mitchell by the fire. Gloria smiled in the darkness. They were splitting up, making her job easier. She waited until the hotel door closed, then moved down the hillside like a ghost. Ralph sat with his back to the street, staring into the flames. The fire had ruined his night vision, and the whiskey had dulled his reflexes. He never heard her approach. The rifle barrel pressed against the back of his neck felt cold as winter steel. Ralph froze, his hand halfway to his sidearm. "You took something that belongs to me," Gloria said quietly. Her voice carried no emotion, just flat statement of fact. "Lady, I do not know what you are talking about," Ralph stammered. "We are just travelers passing through." "Black Thunder, my stallion. You cut my fence 3 days ago and led him away." Ralph's shoulders sagged as he realized his situation. "Look, we can work this out. We will give you the horse back. No harm done." "Too late for that. You had your chance to walk away when I warned you. Now we do this the hard way." "What warning? We never saw you before tonight." Gloria smiled without humor. "You saw me, standing on my porch in a blue dress, gray hair and a bun. I told you exactly what would happen if you took my horse." The memory hit Ralph like a physical blow. The quiet woman who had watched them ride past her cabin. She had called out something, but they had been too busy laughing to listen. "Just a crazy old widow," Tyler had said. "Nothing to worry about." "Oh God," Ralph whispered. "You are that woman. I am that woman. And you should have listened." The rifle butt caught him behind the ear, and Ralph slumped forward into the fire. Gloria dragged him clear and checked his pulse. Alive but unconscious. She tied his hands with his own belt and moved toward the hotel. 3 left. The hotel's front door stood slightly ajar, yellow lamplight spilling onto the boardwalk. Gloria could hear voices from the second floor, probably the old manager's office where the outlaws had made their temporary headquarters. She climbed the stairs silently, testing each board before putting her full weight down. The door was solid oak with a frosted glass panel. Through it, she could see 2 figures moving around inside. Timothy Nguyen and Roy Taylor, if her identification was correct. Tyler Kelly's voice came from deeper in the room, giving orders about the morning's travel plans. Gloria considered her options. A direct assault would work, but it was noisy and dangerous. Better to wait and pick them off as they emerged. She settled into position at the head of the stairs and prepared for a long wait. She did not have to wait long. Timothy came out first, heading for the privy behind the building. Gloria let him go, focusing on the remaining targets. Roy followed a few minutes later, walking toward the stairs with a bottle in his hand. He made it 3 steps before he saw her. Roy's hand dropped toward his gun, but Gloria's rifle was already aimed at his chest. "Do not," she said simply. Roy froze, whiskey bottle still clutched in his left hand. His eyes were wide with shock and fear. "You are just one woman," he said, as if trying to convince himself. "One woman who tracked the Jameson gang across 300 miles of wilderness. One woman who brought in Black Pete Morrison and his entire crew. One woman who never missed a shot that mattered." Roy's face went pale as recognition dawned. "You are Gloria Flores, the ghost walker." "I was. Tonight I am again." The whiskey bottle shattered against the floor as Roy went for his gun. He was fast, faster than Gloria had expected, but not fast enough. The Winchester barked once and Roy spun backward into the wall. The bullet took him through the shoulder, a clean wound that would heal if he lived long enough. Tyler Kelly burst from the office, gun already drawn, but Gloria had moved the instant she fired. She rolled left behind the banister as his shot splintered wood where she had been standing. The hotel's old construction worked in her favor, thick beams and solid walls that stopped bullets. "Where is she?" Tyler shouted to Roy, who was clutching his wounded shoulder and trying not to scream. "Gone," Roy gasped, like a ghost. Gloria was already moving down the back stairs using her knowledge of the building's layout. She had spent 2 weeks in this hotel during the winter of 1878, tracking a gang of claim jumpers. Every board and beam was familiar territory. She emerged from the rear door as Timothy returned from the privy, buttoning his pants and whistling tunelessly. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and they both went for their weapons. Timothy was young and confident, but Gloria had been drawing guns before he was born. Her Colt cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion. Timothy's shot went wide, punching a hole in the hotel's back wall. Gloria's bullet found its mark, spinning him around and dropping him in the dirt. Another shoulder wound, carefully placed to disable without killing. 2 down, 1 to go. Tyler Kelly appeared at the hotel's rear window, rifle in hand. He had the high ground and good cover, but Gloria was already moving. She sprinted across the open ground toward the old blacksmith shop, Tyler's shots kicking up dirt at her heels. The smithy's stone walls provided solid cover as Gloria caught her breath and reloaded. Tyler had stopped shooting, probably trying to figure out where she had gone. The silence stretched between them, hunter and hunted, both waiting for the other to make a mistake. "You cannot win this," Tyler called out. "I have got the high ground and plenty of ammunition. Come out now and we can settle this like civilized people." Gloria laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Civilized people do not steal horses from widows. Civilized people listen when they are warned. She had been thinking while Tyler talked, studying the layout of the town and planning her next move. The smithy connected to a series of storage buildings that led back toward the main street. If she could work her way around behind the hotel, she could force Tyler out of his position. The connecting buildings were dark and filled with mining equipment, but Gloria moved through them with confidence. Her eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and her other senses filled in what she could not see. The smell of rust and old leather, the feel of wooden handles and iron tools, the sound of wind through broken windows. She emerged behind the assay office, directly across from the hotel's back entrance. Tyler was still at the window, but his attention was focused on the smithy where he thought she was hiding. Gloria took careful aim and put a bullet through the window frame, inches from his head. Tyler jerked back with a curse, and Gloria was already moving again. She sprinted across the street and through the hotel back door, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Tyler heard her coming and spun to face the stairway, but Gloria was not there. She had gone out the front door and around the building, using the hotel's own bulk as cover. Now she stood in the office doorway behind Tyler, rifle aimed at the center of his back. "Game over," she said quietly. Tyler's shoulders slumped in defeat. He lowered his rifle and turned slowly to face her. "You really are the ghost walker," he said with something like admiration in his voice. "I really am. And you really should have listened when I warned you." Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Gloria finished tying up her prisoners. She had moved them to the old jail, a stone building that still had solid bars on its windows. Roy and Timothy needed medical attention for their wounds, but they would live. Tyler and Ralph were bruised but otherwise intact. Gary Martinez had woken up with a splitting headache and a new respect for quiet women. Black Thunder nickered softly as she approached, his dark eyes bright with intelligence. The stallion had not been mistreated, but she could see the stress of captivity in his posture. She ran her hands over his legs and flanks, checking for injuries, then led him to the creek for water. The outlaws watched from behind their bars as Gloria saddled her mare and prepared Black Thunder for the journey home. None of them spoke, but she could see the questions in their eyes. What happened now? Would she turn them into the territorial authorities? Would she simply ride away and leave them locked up? "I will send word to Marshal Davidson in Pueblo," she told them finally. "He will be here in 2 or 3 days to collect you. There is food and water in the jail, enough to keep you alive until then." "You are not staying to guard us?" Tyler asked. Gloria shook her head. "My job is done. I got my horse back, and you learn not to steal from people you do not understand. The law can handle the rest." She mounted her mare and took Black Thunder's lead rope. then paused to look back at the 5 men who had thought they could rob her with impunity. They looked smaller now, diminished by their defeat and the knowledge of what she could have done to them. Next time someone warns you to leave their property alone, maybe you will listen, she said. If there is a next time. The ride home took most of the day, but Gloria was in no hurry. The mountains were beautiful in the morning light, and Black Thunder moved with his old grace and power. She had missed him more than she realized, missed the way he responded to her voice and the trust in his dark eyes. As they descended into her valley, Gloria felt the familiar peace settle over her like a warm blanket. This was home, this quiet place she had built with her own hands. The cabin looked small and welcoming against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. Smoke rose from the chimney where she had banked the fire before leaving. She turned Black Thunder into his paddock and watched him roll in the dust, celebrating his return to familiar ground. The other horses gathered around him, nickering greetings and establishing the old social order. Everything was as it should be. That evening, Gloria sat on her porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sun set behind the western peaks. The Winchester leaned against the wall beside her chair, cleaned and oiled, but no longer hidden away. She had learned something important during the past few days. She could not completely leave her old life behind. The skills and instincts that made her a legendary marshal were part of who she was, just as much as her love for horses and quiet mornings. The trick was finding balance, being ready to use those skills when necessary while not letting them define her entire existence. A rider appeared on the trail leading to her cabin, moving slowly in the gathering dusk. Gloria tensed for a moment, then relaxed as she recognized the familiar figure. Marshal Davidson from Pueblo, probably coming to get her statement about the horse thieves. "Evening, Gloria," he called as he dismounted. "Heard you had some excitement up here." "Nothing I could not handle," she replied. "Coffee is still hot if you want some." Davidson climbed the porch steps and accepted the offered cup gratefully. He was a good man, honest and competent, though he lacked the edge that made truly great lawmen. That edge could not be taught or learned. It was earned through years of facing death and coming out alive. "Those boys are singing quite a story," Davidson said after a long sip of coffee. "According to them, you took on 5 armed men single-handed and won without breaking a sweat. They took my horse. I took it back. Simple as that." Davidson chuckled. "Nothing simple about tracking 5 men through mountain country and capturing them all alive. That takes real skill." Gloria shrugged. "Old habits, I suppose." The marshal studied her face in the lamplight. "You know, we could use someone with your experience. The territorial government is forming a new task force to deal with organized criminal gangs. The pay is good, and you would have a free hand to operate as you see fit." "I am retired, Marshal. Have been for 8 years now. Retirement did not stop you from going after those horse thieves. That was different. They made it personal when they took Black Thunder." Davidson nodded but did not press the issue. He finished his coffee and stood to leave. "Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. Men like Tyler Kelly are not going to stop stealing just because you caught them once. They will be back on the trail as soon as they serve their time." "Let them come," Gloria said quietly. "I will be here." After Davidson rode away, Gloria remained on the porch until full darkness settled over the valley. The night sounds were peaceful, owls calling from the forest and the distant howl of a coyote pack. No human voices, no hoofbeats on the trail. Just the natural rhythm of the wilderness she had chosen to call home. But she kept the Winchester close at hand, just in case. The next morning brought visitors of a different sort. Angela Collins arrived first, driving her wagon up the mountain road with her usual disregard for safety. Angela ran the general store in Pine Ridge, the nearest town, and she had never met a piece of gossip she could not improve with creative embellishment. "Gloria, honey," Angela called before her wagon had even stopped rolling. "Is it true you shot it out with 5 desperados and captured them all single-handed?" "I got my horse back," Gloria replied diplomatically. "That is all that matters." "But the story I heard," Angela continued, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for a woman her size. "The story I heard is that you are some kind of famous gunfighter from the old days. They are saying you used to be a federal marshal." "People say a lot of things, Angela. Most of them are not worth repeating. But it is true, is it not? You are Gloria Flores, the ghost walker." Gloria sighed. She had hoped her reputation would stay buried with her old life, but small towns thrived on secrets and gossip. Once word got out, there would be no putting it back. I was a federal marshal, she admitted, long time ago, before I came here. Angela's eyes went wide with excitement. I knew it. I told everyone at the store that you were too calm and competent to be just a horse rancher. The way you handle yourself, the way you watch everything. You have that look. What look? The look of someone who has seen things, done things. My late husband had it too after he came back from the war. More visitors arrived throughout the day. Kimberly Patel, who ran the boarding house in Pine Ridge. Evelyn Rodriguez, whose family had a sheep ranch on the other side of the valley. Even old Doc Whitman made the trip up from town, claiming he wanted to check on her after her ordeal, but really just curious about the woman who had become the talk of 3 counties. They all asked the same questions in different ways. Was she really the famous ghost walker? How many men had she killed? Why had she retired? Would she consider taking on other jobs? Because there were plenty of bad men who needed dealing with. Gloria answered politely but revealed little. Yes, she had been a federal marshal. No, she was not looking for more work. Yes, she was perfectly capable of defending herself and her property. Beyond that, her past was her own business. But word continued to spread, carried by travelers and telegraph wires to every corner of the territory. Within a week, Gloria's quiet valley had become a destination for curiosity seekers, reporters, and men who wanted to test themselves against a legend. The first challenger arrived on a Tuesday morning, a young gunfighter from Texas who called himself Lightning Jack Morrison. He wore his guns low on his hips and had the swagger of someone who had never faced real danger. Gloria watched him ride up the trail from her kitchen window and sighed deeply. She met him on the porch, Winchester in hand, but not aimed at anything in particular. Lightning Jack dismounted with theatrical flair and hitched his horse to the rail. "You Gloria Flores?" he asked, hand resting on his gun butt. "I am. What do you want? Heard you were some kind of fast gun back in the day. Thought I might see if the stories were true." "The stories are true. I suggest you ride on before you find out how true." "Lightning." Jack laughed and took a step closer. "Lady, I have been practicing my draw since I was 12 years old. I can put 6 shots in a playing card at 20 paces. "That is very impressive," Gloria said mildly. "But I am not a playing card, and this is not a game." "You scared, old woman." Gloria's eyes went cold as winter ice. "I am not scared. I am tired. Tired of young fools who think killing makes them important. Tired of men who confuse speed with skill. Most of all, I am tired of explaining why I do not want to kill you." Lightning Jack's confidence wavered slightly, but he had committed himself. "Draw when you are ready," he said, settling into a gunfighter's crouch. Gloria did not move. She stood relaxed on her porch, rifle held casually in both hands. Lightning Jack waited for her to go for her sidearm, but she made no move toward the Colt on her hip. "Any time now," he said nervously. "You first," Gloria replied. Lightning Jack's nerve broke. He clawed for his gun with impressive speed, clearing leather in a blur of motion. But Gloria had been tracking his intentions from the moment he spoke, reading the subtle signs that telegraphed his decision to draw. The Winchester came up smooth and fast, and she put a bullet through his gun hand before his Colt could clear the holster. Lightning Jack screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching his shattered fingers. Blood seeped between his knuckles as he stared at Gloria in shock and pain. "You will live," she said matter-of-factly, "but you will never draw that fast again. Consider it a lesson in humility." She bandaged his hand with professional efficiency, then helped him mount his horse. Lightning Jack rode away without another word, his legend considerably diminished and his gun hand probably ruined for life. Word of the encounter spread even faster than the original story. Gloria Flores had faced down a professional gunfighter and ended the confrontation with surgical precision. She had not killed him, but she had made her point more effectively than any corpse could have. More challengers came. Some were young men seeking reputation. Others were older gunfighters whose skills were fading and who hoped to reclaim their youth by defeating a legend. A few were simply violent men who enjoyed hurting people and thought a woman would be easy prey. Gloria dealt with each of them in her own way. Some she warned off with words. Others required more direct persuasion. None of them left her valley unchanged, and word gradually spread that challenging the Ghost Walker was a losing proposition. But the attention brought other problems. Reporters arrived from Denver and San Francisco wanting to interview the famous female marshal. Dime novel writers showed up with fantastic stories about her exploits, most of them bearing little resemblance to reality. Photographers wanted to capture her image for the illustrated papers. Gloria refused them all. She had not sought fame during her marshal days, and she certainly did not want it now. But the more she tried to avoid publicity, the more mysterious and intriguing she became to the outside world. The real test came 6 months later, when Kimberly King arrived at Gloria's cabin with tears in her eyes and desperation in her voice. Kimberly owned a small ranch 30 miles south, where she raised cattle with her teenage son after her husband died in a mining accident. They took Billy. Kimberly sobbed as Gloria helped her down from her exhausted horse. A gang of men, maybe 8 or 10 of them. They said I owed them money for protection, but I never asked for protection. When I told them to leave, they took my boy. Gloria poured coffee and let Kimberly tell her story. A new gang had moved into the southern part of the territory, calling themselves the Regulators. They claimed to be providing security services to ranchers and miners, but their protection was really extortion. Pay their fees or face consequences. Most people paid rather than fight. The Regulators were well-armed and organized, led by a man called Colonel Briggs, who claimed to be a former cavalry officer. They had the backing of certain territorial politicians and operated with near impunity. But Kimberly had refused to pay, and now they had her son. They want $500, she continued. Money I do not have. They said if I do not pay by tomorrow night, Billy will disappear forever. Gloria studied the younger woman's face. Kimberly was strong and determined, the kind of frontier woman who could survive anything except losing her child. She had ridden 30 miles through dangerous country to ask for help, probably because she had heard the stories about Gloria's past. Where are they holding him? Gloria asked. Old fort near Copper Creek. It has been abandoned for years, but the walls are still solid. Perfect place for men who do not want to be disturbed. How many men? Kimberly shook her head. I only saw 6 when they came to my ranch, but there could be more at the fort. They are well armed and they know the country. Gloria was quiet for a long time, thinking. 8 to 10 men in a fortified position, holding a hostage. It was the kind of job that would normally require a full company of cavalry or at least a dozen experienced lawmen. Taking them on alone was dangerous to the point of being suicidal, but they had taken a child. I will need supplies, Gloria said finally, and I will need you to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. Kimberly's face lit up with hope. You will help me. I will get your son back. But this is not going to be easy, and there are no guarantees. These men are professionals, not the amateurs who stole my horse. I do not care how dangerous it is. Billy is all I have left. Gloria spent the rest of the day preparing. She cleaned and checked her weapons, loaded extra ammunition, and studied maps of the Copper Creek area. The old fort was well positioned for defense, built on a hill with clear fields of fire in all directions. A direct assault would be impossible without heavy casualties. But Gloria had not survived 15 years of law enforcement by making frontal attacks on superior forces. She had learned to use stealth, patience, and superior marksmanship to overcome numerical disadvantages. The Regulators might have more men, but they did not have her experience. As evening fell, she and Kimberly rode south toward Copper Creek. They traveled carefully, avoiding main trails and keeping to rough country where their tracks would be hard to follow. Gloria set a pace that would get them to the fort area before dawn, when human alertness was at its lowest ebb. The old fort sat on a mesa overlooking the creek valley, its adobe walls still intact after 20 years of abandonment. Lamplight showed in several windows, and smoke rose from cooking fires. The Regulators had made themselves comfortable in their stronghold. Gloria studied the layout through her field glasses, counting sentries and noting patrol patterns. 6 men visible, probably more inside the buildings. They were confident in their security, but not careless. Professional criminals who knew their business. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had taken a child from his mother, and that mother had brought their crime to the attention of Gloria Flores. The attack began at 3 in the morning, when human alertness was at its lowest and shadows provided maximum concealment. Gloria had positioned herself on a ridge 800 yards from the fort, well beyond the range of the defenders' weapons, but close enough for her Winchester to be devastatingly effective. The first shot took out the sentry on the north wall, a clean hit that dropped him silently into the courtyard. The second shot shattered a lantern in the main building, plunging half the fort into darkness. By the time the regulators realized they were under attack, Gloria had already shifted position. Confusion reigned in the fort as men stumbled from their beds, grabbing weapons and trying to locate their attacker. Muzzle flashes lit the night as they fired wildly into the darkness, their shots falling hundreds of yards short of Gloria's position. She picked her targets carefully, using the scope to identify leaders and eliminate them first. A man who seemed to be giving orders went down with a bullet through his chest. Another who was trying to organize the defense took a round that spun him around and dropped him behind the wall. The regulators were brave enough, but they were facing an enemy they could not see or reach. Gloria's shots came from different positions, forcing them to spread their defenses thin. Every time they thought they had located her muzzle flash, she had already moved to a new firing position. Colonel Briggs finally showed himself, a tall man with a military bearing who tried to rally his men. He made it to the center of the courtyard before Gloria's bullet found him, a perfect shot that ended his criminal career permanently. With their leader down, the remaining regulators lost their nerve. Some tried to flee on horseback, only to discover that Gloria had anticipated their escape routes. Others barricaded themselves in the buildings and waited for dawn, hoping to survive until they could surrender. But Gloria was not interested in prisoners. These men had terrorized innocent families and kidnapped a child. Justice would be swift and final. She worked her way closer to the fort as the sky began to lighten, using every scrap of cover to avoid the defenders' increasingly desperate shots. The Winchester had served her well, but now she needed the close-range accuracy of her Colt. The final assault came with the sunrise. Gloria scaled the fort's back wall where the defenders were thinnest, moving like smoke through the shadows. The remaining regulators never saw her coming until it was too late. She found Billy King locked in a storage room, frightened but unharmed. The boy was maybe 14 years old, with his mother's determined eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He had not broken under captivity, and he looked at Gloria with something approaching hero worship. "Are you the Ghost Walker?" he asked as she cut his bonds. "I am just someone who does not like men who hurt children," she replied. "Your mother is waiting for you." The ride back to Kimberly's ranch took most of the day, but it was a triumphant journey. Mother and son were reunited, the regulators were finished, and word would spread that some crimes carried a price too high to pay. But Gloria knew this was not the end. There would always be more criminals, more innocent people who needed protection, more calls for the Ghost Walker to emerge from retirement. The question was whether she wanted to answer those calls or retreat back into the quiet life she had built. Standing on Kimberly's porch as the sun set over the valley, watching mother and son embrace, Gloria made her decision. She could not completely leave her old life behind, but she could choose when and how to use those skills. Some fights were worth having, some people were worth protecting, some legends were worth living up to. The Ghost Walker was back, but on her own terms. Word of the Copper Creek raid spread across the territory like wildfire. The regulators had been one of the most feared criminal organizations in 3 states, and their destruction by a single woman became the stuff of instant legend. Newspapers from Chicago to San Francisco picked up the story, and Gloria's name appeared in headlines from coast to coast. But she paid little attention to the publicity. There was work to be done, and people who needed help. A steady stream of visitors made their way to her valley, some seeking justice, others offering employment, all drawn by the knowledge that the Ghost Walker had returned to active service. Gloria was selective about the cases she accepted. She had no interest in settling business disputes or hunting down runaway husbands. But when children were endangered, when innocent people faced overwhelming odds, when the law was too distant or corrupt to provide protection, she answered the call. Her methods evolved with experience. Sometimes the mere threat of her involvement was enough to resolve a situation. Criminal gangs would dissolve rather than face her, and corrupt officials would suddenly discover their consciences when her name was mentioned. The legend had become a weapon in itself. But when persuasion failed, Gloria was prepared to use more direct methods. Her skills had not diminished with age. If anything, they had been refined by years of experience and the wisdom that came with survival. She was faster, more accurate, and infinitely more dangerous than she had been in her youth. The territorial governor eventually offered her an official position, complete with badge and salary. Gloria politely declined. She had tried working within the system once, and while it had its advantages, it also came with restrictions and political considerations that limited her effectiveness. Better to remain independent, answerable only to her own conscience and the people who truly needed help. Years passed, and the Ghost Walker became a permanent fixture in territorial folklore. Children grew up hearing stories of the quiet woman who could track anyone, outshoot anyone, and appear anywhere justice was needed. Some of the stories were true, others were embellished beyond recognition, but all of them served the same purpose. They reminded people that evil actions had consequences, that the innocent were not defenseless, and that sometimes legends were real. Gloria continued to live in her valley, raising horses and tending her small ranch. But the Winchester always stood ready beside her door, and the Colt never left her side. She had learned to balance both sides of her nature, the peaceful widow and the deadly marshal, and she was content with the choice she had made. On quiet evenings, she would sit on her porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, black thunder grazing peacefully in the meadow below. The valley was still her sanctuary, but it was no longer her prison. She had found a way to honor both her past and her present, to be both the woman she had become and the legend she had always been. And if trouble came calling, as it inevitably would, Gloria Flores would be ready. The Ghost Walker never truly retired. She simply waited for the next time she was needed. The last light faded from the western peaks, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its ancient song to the moon. Gloria smiled and went inside to check her weapons. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who needed help, new opportunities to prove that some things were worth fighting for. She was ready for whatever came next. After all, she was the Ghost Walker, and legends never really die.